A silent puppy's piercing gaze pulls a grieving vet into a stormy mystery, unraveling secrets and saving lives. Please subscribe, pause Verve, like and share the video with those who need love. The morning sun filtered through the blinds of Riverside Veterinary Clinic, casting soft stripes across the linoleum floor. The small, unassuming building sat on a quiet street in Willow Creek, a town where neighbors still waved from porches, and the local diner served the same blueberry pie recipe for decades. Inside, the air carried the familiar scent of antiseptic and pet shampoo, a comforting constant in a world that often felt unpredictable. Examination rooms lined one wall, their stainless steel tables gleaming under fluorescent lights, while a modest waiting area held worn chairs and a bulletin board plastered with pet care tips and thank you notes from grateful clients. Dr. Sarah Mitchell moved through this space with the precision of a conductor leading an orchestra. At 32, she was the clinic's lead veterinarian, known for her steady hands and encyclopedic knowledge of animal care. Her white lab coat hung neatly. On her frame, her dark hair pulled back into a tight ponytail that never seemed to loosen no matter how long the day. This morning, she was examining a tabby cat named Whiskers, her fingers gently probing the feline's abdomen as she listened to its owner, Mrs. Delaney, recount its recent lethargy. "He's just not himself, Dr. Mitchell," Mrs. Delaney said, her voice tinged with worry. She was a retired schoolteacher with a penchant for knitting sweaters for her cats, and Whiskers was her pride and joy. "He's been sleeping more and he barely touched his tuna last night." Sarah nodded, her hazel eyes focused on the cat as she adjusted her stethoscope. "His heart rate is normal, and I'm not feeling any obvious masses," she said, her tone calm and professional. "I'd like to run a blood panel to check his thyroid and kidney function. It could be age-related, but we'll get a clearer picture soon." She jotted notes on a chart with precise, deliberate strokes, her handwriting as orderly as the clinic itself. Mrs. Delaney sighed with relief. "You always know what to do, dear. I don't know what we'd do without you." Sarah offered a small, practiced smile, the kind that reassured without inviting further conversation. "We'll take good care of him," she said, helping Whiskers back into his carrier. As Mrs. Delaney left, Sarah turned to sterilize her instruments, her movements automatic, almost mechanical. The clinic was her domain, a place where every tool had its place, every procedure followed a protocol. It was a world she could control, unlike the chaos that lingered in the corners of her personal life. From the reception desk, Nurse Clara Thompson watched Sarah with quiet concern. Clara, a warm, silver-haired woman in her late 50s, had been with the clinic for over a decade. She wore colorful scrubs, today's featured cartoon dogs, and had a knack for remembering every client's name and pet's quirks. She noticed the shadows under Sarah's eyes, the way her shoulders stiffened when anyone asked how she was doing. Clara knew Sarah was more than a skilled vet. She was someone carrying a weight she rarely shared. "Busy morning already," Clara remarked, sorting through appointment files. "You holding up okay? You look like you could use a coffee." "I'm fine," Sarah replied, her voice polite but distant, as she wiped down the exam table. "Just need to prep for the next patient. Mr. Larson's bringing in his parakeet at 10. Clara didn't push, but her eyes lingered on Sarah a moment longer. She'd seen that look before, on herself, years ago, when grief had made the world feel like a place to endure rather than live in. Sarah's efficiency was a shield, one Clara recognized but respected enough not to challenge outright. Outside, the town was waking up. Delivery trucks rumbled down Main Street, and the first dog walkers of the day strolled past the clinic, their pets tugging at leashes. The air held the crisp promise of autumn, with leaves just beginning to turn gold and red. Sarah's world, though, was contained within these walls, where she could focus on heartbeats and lab results, instead of the ache that surfaced in quiet moments. She hadn't always been this guarded. Once, she'd been the vet who lingered to chat with clients, who laughed easily and kept a jar of dog treats on her desk for visiting pups. But that version of Sarah felt like a distant memory, buried under months of loss she hadn't yet found words for. As she finished cleaning, a faint movement caught her eye through the clinic's front window. Across the street, half hidden by a lamppost, stood a small Labrador retriever puppy. Its golden fur was matted, damp from the morning dew, and its frame was thin, but it didn't move or bark. It simply stood there, watching her with large, steady eyes that seemed to hold an uncanny focus. Sarah paused, her cloth still in hand, meeting its gaze for a moment. The puppy didn't flinch or wag its tail. It just stared, as if it had been waiting for her to notice. Stray, probably, she muttered to herself, turning back to her work. Willow Creek wasn't immune to abandoned pets, and she'd seen her share of them over the years. Yet something about this puppy's silence, its deliberate stillness, lingered in her mind as she moved on to her next task. The clinic hummed, with its usual rhythm, but the image of those watchful eyes stayed with her, a quiet ripple in the orderly surface of her day. The fluorescent lights of Riverside Veterinary Clinic buzzed softly as Sarah Mitchell prepared for her next appointment. The parakeet, a vibrant green bird named Kiwi, chirped nervously in its cage while its owner, Mr. Larson, recounted its recent feather-plucking habit. Sarah listened with her usual attentiveness, her hands moving deftly to examine the bird's wings and skin. Her clinical precision was flawless, checking for mites, noting the bird's weight, recommending a dietary adjustment, but her responses were clipped, her smiles fleeting. To Mr. Larson, she was the capable Dr. Mitchell, but beneath the surface a quiet storm churned. Sarah's life had once been fuller, brighter. She had grown up in Willow Creek, the kind of kid who bandaged stray cats and dreamed of saving every animal she met. Veterinary school had been a natural path, followed by a marriage to her high school sweetheart, Tom, and plans for a family. But 8 months ago, a miscarriage at 5 months had shattered that future. The loss of their daughter, whom they'd named Lily, had unraveled everything. Tom had moved out, unable to bridge the silence that grew between them, and Sarah had thrown herself into work, building walls around her grief. The clinic became her refuge, a place where she could focus on fixing what she could control, even as her own heart remained fractured. Now, as she handed Kiwi back to Mr. Larson with a printed care sheet, her hazel eyes betrayed a flicker of exhaustion. The dark circles beneath them were more pronounced today, a testament to sleepless nights spent staring at the ceiling of her small apartment. She avoided mirrors, not wanting to see the woman who looked more like a stranger each day, pale, drawn, with a tightness in her jaw that never quite softened. Her hands, though steady during procedures, sometimes trembled when she was alone, clutching a coffee mug or folding laundry in the quiet of her empty home. "Call if Kiwi's plucking worsens," Sarah said, her voice clear but mechanical. "We might need to adjust his environment or consider a behavioral consult." Mr. Larson nodded, his weathered face softening. "You're a godsend, Dr. Mitchell. Don't know how you keep it all together." Sarah's shoulders stiffened slightly, the compliment landing like a stone in still water. "Just doing my job," she replied, turning to update Kiwi's chart. The praise felt undeserved, a reminder of the effort it took to maintain her composure. She didn't feel together. She felt like she was holding herself in place with sheer will, one careful step at a time. As Mr. Larson left, Clara approached with a stack of files, her colorful scrubs a bright contrast to the clinic's sterile whites. "How you skipped lunch again," she said, her tone gentle but pointed. "I brought you a sandwich, turkey and avocado, your favorite. It's in the break room." "Not hungry," Sarah said, not looking up from her paperwork. "I'll eat later." Clara set the files down, her hands lingering on the desk. "Sarah, you're running on fumes. You can't keep going like this." "I'm fine," Sarah insisted, her pen moving faster across the page. The words were a reflex, a mantra she repeated, to herself and others. But fine was a lie she wore like armor, and Clara's knowing look made it feel thinner than usual. Sarah's grief was a private thing, locked away where it couldn't spill into her work. She didn't talk about Lily, didn't mention the nursery she'd painted pale blue, or the tiny clothes still folded in a box she couldn't bear to open. To the world she was Dr. Mitchell, competent and composed. Only in the dead of night did she let herself feel the weight of what she'd lost. The clinic's phone rang, pulling Sarah's attention to a new task. She answered with her usual professionalism, scheduling an emergency appointment for a dog with a limp. As she hung up, she glanced out the window, her breath catching. There, across the street, was the Labrador Retriever puppy again. It stood in the same spot as before, its golden fur slightly less matted but still damp from the morning's mist, its eyes locked onto hers, unblinking, with that same unnerving intensity. Sarah's hand tightened around her pen, a prickle of unease running through her. Most strays begged for food or scampered away when noticed. This one just watched as if it knew something she didn't. "Clara," Sarah said, her voice quieter than intended. "That puppy's back." Clara joined her at the window, peering out. "Poor thing. Looks like it's been out there a while." "Want me to call animal control?" Sarah hesitated, her gaze still fixed on the puppy. Its stillness was unsettling, but there was something else, a spark of determination in its eyes that stirred a faint echo in her chest. "Not yet," she said finally. "It's not causing trouble, probably just lost." Clara raised an eyebrow but didn't press. "If you say so. Just don't let it get to you. You've got enough on your plate." Sarah nodded, turning back to her work, but the puppy's presence lingered like a shadow. She didn't know why it unsettled her so much, why its gaze felt like a question she wasn't ready to answer. All she knew was that her carefully ordered world felt just a little less certain with those eyes watching her, waiting for something she couldn't yet name. The afternoon sun dipped low over Willow Creek, painting the sky in hues of amber and pink as Sarah Mitchell locked the clinic's front door. The day had been a marathon of appointments, stitches for a terrier's paw, vaccinations for a litter of kittens, and a tense surgery to remove a tumor from an elderly beagle. Sarah's hands had moved with their usual precision, her mind focused on each task, but the weight of the day clung to her like damp clothes. She adjusted her bag on her shoulder, her lab coat folded neatly inside, and turned toward her car parked across the quiet street. The air was cool, carrying the earthy scent of fallen leaves, and the town was settling into its evening rhythm, shops closing, streetlights flickering on. As she reached for her car door, a faint rustle stopped her. Her eyes darted to the shadowed corner of the street, where the Labrador Retriever puppy stood, its small form partially hidden behind a lamp-post. Its golden fur was matted, streaked with dirt, and its ribs were faintly visible beneath its thin frame. Yet it didn't cower or whine like most strays Sarah had encountered. Instead, it stood perfectly still, its large amber eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made her breath catch. The puppy's silence was eerie, its gaze steady as if it were studying her, waiting for something only it understood. Sarah's first instinct was to dismiss it. Strays weren't uncommon in Willow Creek, especially near the clinic where the promise of food scraps sometimes drew hungry animals. But this puppy was different. It didn't approach, didn't wag its tail, or bark for attention. It just watched, its eyes reflecting the soft glow of the streetlight like twin lanterns in the dusk. For a moment, Sarah felt exposed, as if the puppy could see through her carefully constructed walls to the raw, aching places she kept hidden. She shook her head, breaking the spell. "Just a stray," she muttered, sliding into her car. The engine hummed to life and she pulled away, deliberately avoiding the rearview mirror. But the image of those eyes lingered, sharp and unyielding like a note left unread. She told herself it was nothing, just a lost dog making the rounds, probably drawn to the clinic's warmth. Yet the unease stayed with her, a quiet ripple, in the still waters of her routine. The next morning, Sarah arrived at the clinic earlier than usual, her thermos of coffee steaming in the chilly dawn. She'd slept poorly, her dreams fragmented with images of empty hallways and a distant, wordless cry she couldn't place. The clinic was silent as she unlocked the door, the familiar antiseptic smell grounding her as she set up her workstation. She was halfway through organizing her instruments when she glanced out the window and froze. There it was again, the Labrador Retriever puppy, standing across the street in the same spot. Its fur was damp from the morning fog, but it stood, resolute, those amber eyes locked on her with the same unwavering focus. Sarah's hands stilled over the tray of scalpels. "You're persistent," she said under her breath, half expecting the puppy to vanish like a mirage. But it didn't. It stayed motionless, as if it had all the time in the world to wait her out. She turned away, busying herself with paperwork, But her thoughts kept drifting back to the puppy. Why was it here? Why her? The clinic saw dozens of strays, but none had ever fixated on her like this, with such deliberate, silent purpose. Clara arrived soon after, her cheerful hum breaking the quiet as she hung her jacket. "Morning, Sarah," she called, then paused, following Sarah's gaze to the window. "That the same pup from yesterday?" Sarah nodded, her voice tight. "It's been out there since I got here, just staring." Clara peered out, her brow furrowing. "Odd little thing. Doesn't look like it's begging for food. Almost like it's waiting for something." "Or someone," Sarah said before she could stop herself. The words hung in the air, heavier than she'd intended. She shook her head, forcing a shrug. "Probably just lost. It'll move on." Clara didn't look convinced, but she let it go, turning to prep the day's files. Sarah tried to focus on her first patient, a rabbit with a dental issue, but the puppy's presence gnawed at her. Between appointments, she stole glances out the window, and each time the puppy was there, unmoving, its eyes tracking her every move. It didn't flinch when a delivery truck rumbled by, or when a group of school kids laughed their way down the sidewalk. It was as if the rest of the world didn't exist. Only Sarah did. By midday, her curiosity was tinged with irritation. She didn't have time for mysteries, not with a full schedule and her own emotions already stretched thin. Yet the puppy's persistence was impossible to ignore. During a brief lull, she grabbed a handful of dog treats from the clinic's stash and stepped outside, the autumn air sharp against her skin. The puppy didn't move as she approached, but its ears twitched, alert. "Hey," Sarah called softly, keeping her distance. "Are you hungry?" She tossed a treat onto the pavement halfway between them. The puppy's eyes flicked to the treat, then back to her, but it didn't budge. It wasn't fear. Sarah knew fear in animals, the trembling, the tucked tail. This was something else, something deliberate, like a choice. She took a step closer and the puppy took a precise step back, maintaining the distance between them. Sarah frowned, her irritation flaring. "What's your deal?" she muttered, tossing another treat. Again the puppy ignored it, its gaze never wavering. For a moment, they stood locked in a silent standoff, the bustling street fading into the background. Sarah's heart thudded, not with fear but with a strange, unnameable feeling, like the puppy was asking her to see something she wasn't ready to face. The clinic door chimed behind her, and Clara's voice broke the moment. "Sarah, Mrs. Delaney's on the phone about Whisker's lab results." Sarah exhaled, turning away. "Coming," she said, but not before glancing back at the puppy. It hadn't moved, its eyes still fixed on her, steady and patient. She shook off the chill that ran through her and headed inside, determined to bury herself in work. But as she explained Whisker's blood work to Mrs. Delaney, her mind kept circling back to the puppy, its silent vigil a puzzle she couldn't yet solve. The days slipped by in Willow Creek, each one blending into the next with the steady rhythm of Sarah Mitchell's work at Riverside Veterinary Clinic. The crisp autumn air grew sharper, and the leaves piled higher on the sidewalks. But the Labrador Retriever puppy remained a constant. Every morning, as Sarah unlocked the clinic door, she'd find it there, across the street, tucked behind. A lamppost or a mailbox, its golden fur increasingly matted, but its amber eyes as piercing as ever. It never barked, never approached, just watched her with that same unnerving intensity, as if it were tethered to her by an invisible thread. At first, Sarah tried to dismiss it, but its persistence was chipping away at her resolve, stirring, a mix of curiosity and unease that she couldn't shake. By the third day, the puppy's presence had become a silent ritual. Sarah would arrive at dawn, her thermos of coffee in hand, and there it would be, standing in the morning mist, its small form almost ghostly in the half-light. She'd pause, meeting its gaze for a moment before turning away, her jaw tight. During breaks, she'd catch herself glancing out the window, and each time the puppy was still there, unmoving, its eyes tracking her through the glass. It didn't follow clients or react to passing cars. It was as if Sarah was its sole focus, a beacon in its quiet, mysterious world. "It's back again," Sarah said one afternoon, her voice low as she disinfected an exam table. Clara, sorting vaccine vials at the reception desk, looked up with a knowing smile. That pup's got a crush on you, Clara teased, but her eyes held a flicker of concern. You sure you don't want to call animal control? It's been days. Sarah hesitated, her cloth pausing mid-swipe. She'd considered it, had even picked up the phone once, but something stopped her. The puppy wasn't aggressive or a nuisance. It was just there. It's not hurting anyone, she said finally, resuming her cleaning with brisk strokes. Probably just waiting for its owner. Clara didn't push, but Sarah could feel her watching as she moved through her tasks. The truth was, Sarah didn't know why she was resisting. Animal control was the logical step, the responsible one. Yet the puppy's steady gaze felt personal, like a challenge or a question she wasn't ready to answer. It was easier to focus on her work, on the tangible problems of infected ears and limping paws, than to dwell on the strange pull she felt toward this silent stranger. That evening, as Sarah locked up the clinic, the sky was heavy with clouds, the air thick with the promise of rain. She stepped onto the sidewalk, her bag slung over her shoulder, and there it was again, the puppy, standing behind a rusty mailbox, its fur already speckled with the first drops of drizzle. Sarah's breath hitched. "You're going to get soaked," she muttered, more to herself than to the puppy. She took a step toward it, fishing a treat from her pocket, but the puppy mirrored her movement, stepping back to maintain its careful distance. Its eyes never left hers, steady and unyielding, even as the rain began to fall in earnest. Frustration flared in Sarah's chest. "What do you want from me?" she snapped, her voice sharper than intended. The words echoed in the empty street, swallowed by the patter of rain. The puppy didn't flinch or run. It just stood there, water streaming down its face, watching her with a patience that felt almost human. Sarah's hands clenched at her sides, the treat crumbling in her fist. She turned abruptly and strode to her car, her shoes splashing through puddles. As she drove away, she couldn't resist a glance in the rearview mirror. The puppy emerged from its hiding spot, trotting after her car with a steady, purposeful gait, keeping pace for half a block before vanishing into the gathering dusk. The next morning, Sarah's unease had deepened into something she couldn't name. She'd dreamed of rain-slicked streets and a pair of amber eyes watching her from the shadows, a dream that left her restless and unsettled. At the clinic, she threw herself into her work with almost desperate intensity, vaccinating a squirming dachshund and cleaning a cockatiel's infected eye while rattling off care instructions in a clipped tone. Clara noticed her gentle attempts at conversation met with curt replies. "You're pushing yourself too hard," she said during a rare lull, but Sarah waved her off, burying herself in paperwork. Yet the puppy was never far from her thoughts. By noon, she couldn't stand it anymore. She stepped outside, ignoring the chill in the air, and scanned the street. The puppy was there, behind a telephone pole this time, its small body half hidden but its eyes unmistakable. Sarah's heart thudded as she approached, slower this time, her voice softer. "Hey, little one," she said, crouching down and holding out a treat. "You've got to be hungry, right?" The puppy tilted its head slightly but didn't move, its gaze locked on hers. She set the treat on the ground and backed away, watching as it approached cautiously, sniffed the offering and then retreated without eating. Sarah's frustration gave way to a flicker of admiration. This wasn't a typical stray, driven by hunger or fear. It was deliberate, calculated, as if it had a purpose she couldn't yet grasp. She returned to the clinic, her mind racing. Why her? Why now? The puppy's persistence was starting to feel like a mirror, reflecting the parts of herself she'd buried, the parts that still longed to connect, to feel, despite the pain it might bring. That evening, as she left the clinic, the puppy was waiting again, its fur darkened by the day's drizzle. Sarah paused, her keys dangling in her hand. The street was quiet, the town settling into its nightly hush. She met the puppy's gaze, and for the first time she didn't look away. The weight of its silent vigil pressed against her, stirring, something deep and unnameable, a spark of curiosity perhaps, or the faintest hint of hope. She didn't know what the puppy wanted, but she was starting to wonder if she needed to find out. The rain had become a constant in Willow Creek, a soft, relentless drizzle that turned the streets glossy and filled the air with the scent of wet earth. Sarah Mitchell navigated her days at Riverside Veterinary Clinic with the same meticulous care, but the Labrador Retriever puppy's persistent presence was unraveling her carefully maintained composure. Each morning she'd find it across the street, its golden fur sodden but its amber eyes as steady as ever, watching her with an intensity that felt like a quiet demand. By the 5th day, Sarah's irritation had morphed into a restless curiosity, tinged with an unease she couldn't articulate. The puppy wasn't just a stray, it was a puzzle, and she was beginning to feel like the key to solving it. Sarah tried to focus on her work, but the puppy infiltrated her thoughts like a melody she couldn't shake. During a routine checkup, for a border collie with an ear infection, she caught herself glancing out the window, half expecting to see those eyes staring back. When she stitched a laceration on a cat's paw, her hands were steady, but her mind wandered to the puppy's deliberate distance, its refusal to take the treats she offered. It wasn't fear or hunger driving it. Sarah knew those behaviors too well. This was something else, something purposeful, and it was starting to haunt her. That evening, as she locked the clinic, the rain had thickened into a steady downpour, drumming against the awning overhead. The puppy was there, tucked behind a dripping mailbox, its small form barely visible in the fading light. Sarah's breath caught as she met its gaze, the amber eyes glinting through the rain like beacons. She'd planned to drive straight home, to lose herself in a glass of wine and the hum of the TV, but something stopped her. Instead, she found herself walking to the corner store a block away, her umbrella forgotten, rain soaking into her jacket. Inside the store, the fluorescent lights buzzed as Sarah stood before a shelf of pet supplies, her fingers hovering over a can of puppy food. She didn't know why she was doing this. Logic told her to call animal control and be done with it, but logic felt flimsy against the weight of the puppy's stare. She bought the can, along with a small bag of treats, and returned to the street. The puppy hadn't moved, its eyes tracking her as she peeled open the can and set it on the sidewalk, a safe distance from its hiding spot. Sarah retreated to her car, parking across the street where she could watch without being obvious. The puppy emerged slowly, its movements cautious but deliberate, pausing every few steps to scan its surroundings. It reached the food and ate quickly, its small jaws working with a hunger it hadn't shown before, yet it remained silent, not a single whimper or bark. When it finished, it looked directly at Sarah's car, as if it knew she was there, before, slipping back into the shadows. Sarah's heart thudded, a mix of awe and frustration swirling in her chest. What was it trying to tell her? Back at her apartment, Sarah paced the small living room, her wet shoes leaving tracks on the hardwood. The encounter had left her restless, the puppy's behavior replaying in her mind like a riddle. She pulled out her phone, her thumb hovering over the animal control number. It was the responsible thing to do. Report a stray, let professionals handle it. The line rang twice before a gruff voice answered. Animal control, how can I help? Sarah's voice was steady, professional. I'm reporting a stray dog, Labrador Retriever puppy, maybe 4 months old. It's been hanging around Riverside Veterinary Clinic on Maple Street for days. Is it aggressive? The voice asked. No, it's... Sarah paused, her gaze drifting to the rain-streaked window. The streetlight outside blurred into a halo mirroring the puppy's reflective eyes. It's quiet, too quiet, just watches, doesn't approach. It could be sick or... I don't know, it's not normal. We'll send someone tomorrow morning. Any other details? Sarah's grip tightened on the phone. She thought of the puppy's purposeful gait, the way it had followed her car that first night, keeping pace for blocks before stopping as if it had reached a boundary. She opened her mouth to describe it, but the words stuck. No, she said finally. That's all. She hung up, her stomach twisting. The call should have felt like closure, but instead it felt like a betrayal. She sank onto the couch, staring at the blank TV screen, the puppy's eyes burning in her memory. Why was it so fixated on her? What did it want? The questions gnawed at her, pulling at the edges of the grief she'd buried so carefully. She didn't sleep that night, her dreams fractured with images of rain and a small golden figure leading her somewhere she couldn't see. The next day, Sarah arrived at the clinic with a heaviness she couldn't shake. The rain had eased into a fine mist, and the puppy was there, closer than usual, standing just beyond the clinic's parking lot. Its fur was soaked, but it didn't shiver or cower. It simply watched, its gaze cutting through the fog like a blade. Sarah's steps faltered, her resolve wavering. She'd called animal control, but seeing the puppy now, so small yet so determined, made her question her decision. Clara noticed her distraction as they prepped for the day's appointments. "You okay?" she asked, her voice gentle as she handed Sarah a chart. "You seem off." "It's nothing," Sarah said, her tone sharper than intended. She softened, forcing a small smile. "Just tired." Clara's eyes flicked to the window, where the puppy's silhouette was barely visible through the mist. "That pup's still out there, isn't it? Getting under your skin." Sarah didn't answer, busying herself with a stack of files. But Clara's words were true. The puppy was getting to her, its silent vigil stirring something she'd tried to keep dormant. It wasn't just a stray anymore. It was a mystery, a challenge, a quiet plea she couldn't ignore. As she moved through her morning, vaccinating a nervous chihuahua and soothing a client's worries about their aging cat, her thoughts kept drifting to the puppy, waiting patiently in the rain. What was it guarding? What was it asking her to see? The storm rolled into Willow Creek with a ferocity that seemed to match Sarah Mitchell's inner turmoil. Thunder rumbled in the distance as she finished her last appointment of the day, a routine checkup for a hamster with overgrown teeth. The clinic was quieter than usual, the relentless rain keeping clients away, and the empty waiting room amplified the sound of water rushing through the gutters outside. Sarah moved through her closing routine with mechanical precision, sterilizing. Instruments updating charts, checking the locked kennels, her mind still tangled with thoughts of the Labrador Retriever puppy. She hadn't seen it since morning, and though she told herself it was for the best, a nagging unease lingered. Clara had left early for a family dinner, leaving Sarah alone in the clinic. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting stark shadows as she shrugged on her raincoat and gathered her things. Lightning flashed through the windows, illuminating the waiting room in brief, blinding bursts. As she reached for the front door handle, a movement outside caught her eye. Her breath hitched. There, sitting directly on the clinic's welcome mat, was the puppy. Its golden fur was plastered to its body, water streaming off its ears and nose in steady rivulets, but it didn't shiver or cower. Unlike every previous encounter, it wasn't looking at Sarah. Its gaze was fixed intently past her, into the clinic, as if searching for something beyond the glass. Sarah froze, her hand still on the handle. The puppy's posture was different, rigid, trembling slightly, whether from cold or something deeper she couldn't tell. Its small form looked impossibly vulnerable against the storm's fury, yet it held its ground, a silent sentinel in the downpour. Thunder cracked overhead, making Sarah flinch, but the puppy didn't move. Then, for the first time, it made a sound, a soft, plaintive whine, barely audible over the rain. The sound pierced Sarah's chest, stirring a mix of fear and urgency. She hadn't felt in months. "What are you doing?" she whispered, her voice lost in the storm. She pushed the door open, expecting the puppy to dart inside, seeking shelter. Instead, it whined again and backed away, its movements deliberate, not panicked. A few steps from the door, it stopped and turned its head, its amber eyes locking onto hers. The look was unmistakable, a plea, a summons. It took another step, paused, and looked back again, as if waiting for her to follow. Sarah's heart pounded. "This is insane," she muttered, but her body was already moving. She grabbed the heavy-duty flashlight from behind the reception desk, its weight grounding her as she pulled her hood up and locked the clinic door. The rain hit her like a wall, soaking through her coat within seconds, but she barely noticed. The puppy led the way, staying just far enough ahead to be visible in the beam of her flashlight, its small form weaving through the storm with purpose. They moved down Maple Street, the town's familiar storefronts blurred by sheets of rain. The puppy turned into a narrow alley, where water rushed along the gutters in miniature rivers, splashing against Sarah's boots. She followed, her flashlight cutting through the darkness, her breath coming in sharp bursts. The alley opened into a maze of back streets she rarely ventured, past shuttered warehouses with boarded windows, through vacant lots choked with weeds and debris. The puppy never wavered, pausing only to ensure Sarah was still behind, its amber eyes glinting in the flashlight's beam. Lightning illuminated the sky as they reached a sagging chain-link fence, the entrance to an abandoned construction site. The puppy squeezed through a gap at the bottom, then waited, its gaze urging Sarah forward. She hesitated, the fence's rusted links cold under her hands. This was reckless. She was alone, in a storm, following a stray into a place she didn't know. But the puppy's whine echoed in her mind, its desperation pulling at something deep within her, something she'd tried to bury. Taking a deep breath, she gripped the fence and climbed over, landing with a splash in a puddle on the other side. The construction site was a chaos of half-finished concrete foundations and piles of discarded materials, looming like ghosts in the rain. The puppy led her deeper, past exposed beams and flapping tarps, until it stopped at a heap of broken pallets and splintered boards in the furthest corner. It turned to face Sarah, its eyes reflecting the flashlight's beam, then nosed aside. A loose sheet of plywood. Sarah stepped closer, her heart racing as she angled the light into the space beneath. The beam revealed a small hollow, barely sheltered by a torn tarp. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. There, huddled together, were 4 tiny Labrador Retriever puppies, their eyes not yet open, their bodies trembling with weak whimpers. Water seeped through gaps in the makeshift shelter, and their small forms were cold and pale, barely moving. The puppy who had led her, now clearly their older sibling, stood guard, its gaze fixed on Sarah with a trust so raw it felt like a physical weight. Sarah knelt, her flashlight shaking slightly in her hand. The scene was heartbreaking. The newborns were so fragile, their survival hanging by a thread in the storm's cruelty. She realized the mother was missing, likely gone, leaving this brave, older puppy to protect its siblings alone. The weight of its silent vigil, its days of watching her, clicked into place. It hadn't been aimless, it had been a plea for help, a desperate mission to save its family. Sarah's chest tightened, her professional detachment crumbling as she looked into the older puppy's eyes. It had chosen her, trusted her, and now it was waiting for her to act. Thunder rolled again, closer now, and Sarah's veterinary instincts surged to the forefront. She yanked off her rain-soaked jacket, her hands trembling not from cold but from the urgency of the moment. The smallest puppy, barely larger than her palm, felt stiff and icy as she wrapped it in the jacket's dry lining. "Hold on," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. She glanced at the older puppy who stood close, its eyes never leaving her. "You did good," she said softly, the words carrying a promise she wasn't sure she could keep. The storm raged around the abandoned construction site, its howling wind and torrential rain a relentless assault on Sarah Mitchell's senses. Her flashlight beam trembled as she knelt beside the pile of debris, the harsh light illuminating the 4 tiny Labrador Retriever puppies huddled in their makeshift den. Their weak whimpers barely reached her over the storm's roar, each sound a fragile thread tying them to life. The older puppy, the one who had led her here through the rain-soaked streets of Willow Creek, stood sentinel at her side, its amber eyes fixed on her with a desperate trust that pierced through her carefully. Guarded heart. Sarah's breath came in shallow bursts, her mind racing as the full weight of the scene settled over her. The newborns were in dire condition. Their bodies, no larger than her hand, were cold and pale, their movements sluggish and sporadic. Water seeped through the torn tarp above, pooling around them, and the rough boards offered little protection from the wind. Sarah's veterinary training kicked in, her eyes scanning for signs of distress, shallow breathing, faint pulses, umbilical cords still attached, indicating they were only days old. The absence of their mother was a glaring void, and the older puppy's solitary vigil told a story of loss Sarah could only guess at. This wasn't a stray wandering aimlessly. This was a survivor, a protector, a sibling who had somehow known to seek help when its family's survival hung in the balance. Sarah's hands moved instinctively, gently lifting the smallest puppy, its body limp and icy against her palm. She wrapped it tightly in the inner lining of her rain-soaked jacket, her fingers trembling as she tucked the fabric around its fragile form. "Come on, little one," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the thunder. The other 3 puppies, were just as weak, their whimpers fading as the cold sapped their strength. Sarah's heart clenched. She knew hypothermia was setting in, and without immediate intervention they wouldn't survive the hour. She turned to the older puppy, whose matted fur was plastered to its thin frame. Its eyes held a plea, a raw, unspoken faith that Sarah was the answer to its silent cries. The realization hit her like a physical blow. This puppy hadn't been following her out of curiosity or hunger. It had been watching, waiting, testing her, choosing her as the one who could save its siblings. Days of standing in the rain, of tracking her movements, of refusing to give up. It had all led to this moment, this desperate gamble in the storm. Sarah's throat tightened, a surge of awe and grief breaking through the wall she'd built around her heart. This puppy, so young and alone, had carried a burden no creature should bear, and it had placed its hope in her. "Where's your Mom?" Sarah murmured, scanning the darkness for any sign of the mother dog. But the older puppy's solitary presence was answer enough. Something had happened, abandonment, injury, or worse, and this brave sibling had taken on the role of guardian. Sarah's mind flashed to her own loss, the daughter she'd carried for 5 months, the nursery she'd never finished. The pain of failing to protect what mattered most was a wound she knew too well, and now, staring into the puppy's eyes, she saw a mirror of that same fierce determination to hold on, to fight, no matter the odds. Despite the progress, the puppy's temperatures stabilizing, their faint squirms signaling life, Sarah's exhaustion was a physical weight, her muscles aching from hours of relentless focus. Yet the fight was far from over, and the challenges ahead loomed like storm clouds on the horizon. Sarah moved with practiced efficiency, checking IV lines and administering another round of glucose solution. The smallest puppy, still her greatest concern, had shown slight improvement. Its heartbeat, stronger but its breathing uneven. She adjusted the oxygen mask, her fingers steady despite the tremor of fatigue in her hands. The other 3 were responding better, their movements more vigorous, but Sarah knew how quickly things could turn. Newborns this young, exposed to such harsh conditions, were vulnerable to infections, organ failure, or sudden declines that even her skills might not counter. Every beep of the monitor, every faint whimper kept her on edge, her heart tethered to their survival. Clara arrived as the sun rose, her colorful scrubs a bright contrast to the room's stark medical setup. She paused in the doorway, taking in the scene Sarah's disheveled hair, her wrinkled scrubs, the makeshift nursery of blankets and equipment. "You've been here all night," Clara said, her voice soft but firm. She set her bag down and moved to Sarah's side, her eyes scanning the puppies. "What do you need?" "Formula prep for the next feeding," Sarah said, her voice hoarse. "And can you check the incubator settings? I want to make sure the humidity's stable." Clara nodded, falling into step without hesitation. They worked in sync, a rhythm born of years together. Clara mixing the special puppy formula while Sarah changed IV bags and cleaned the newborn's delicate skin. Faith watched, occasionally sniffing each nest as if conducting her own assessment. Her presence a quiet reassurance, but beneath Sarah's focus a growing dread simmered. She couldn't shake the memory of her own loss, Lily, the daughter she couldn't save, and the fear that she might fail these puppies too gnawed at her. The first setback came just past noon. The second, smallest puppy, which had been nursing, weakly but eagerly, began to vomit after its feeding. Sarah's heart sank as she recognized the signs: mottled gums, a weakening pulse, a slight drop in temperature despite the warming pad. "No, no, no," she whispered, grabbing supplies with a speed that belied her exhaustion. Sepsis was a likely culprit, an infection that could have been brewing since their time in the rain-soaked den. She started an IV line with antibiotics, checked blood glucose levels and adjusted fluids, her mind racing through protocols even as her emotions threatened to overwhelm her. "How did I miss this?" Sarah muttered, her voice tight with self-reproach. She'd been so focused on hypothermia and hydration, she hadn't caught the subtle signs of infection. Faith paced, whining softly as she nosed the sick puppy, her distress mirroring Sarah's. Clara touched her shoulder, her voice steady. "You're doing everything you can, Sarah. These pups were half gone when you found them. You've already given them a chance." But Sarah couldn't hear the comfort. She stayed beside the puppy, one hand gently stroking its fur, the other monitoring its vitals. Hours passed in a blur of interventions, more antibiotics, oxygen therapy, constant checks. The puppy fought, its tiny body trembling with effort, but its strength was fading. Just past midnight, its breathing grew erratic, each gasp a struggle. Sarah adjusted the oxygen flow, her hands shaking now, her clinical mask crumbling. "Come, son, little one," she pleaded, her voice breaking. "You've made it this far." Faith pressed against her leg, a warm, grounding presence, but the puppy's chest gave one final shudder and went still. Sarah froze, her hand resting on its silent form, the absence of movement a knife to her heart. For a long moment she didn't move, her breath caught in her throat. Then, as if on autopilot, she began the post-mortem routine, disconnecting tubes, cleaning instruments, wrapping the tiny body in a soft towel. She filled out the chart with mechanical precision: time of death, suspected cause, treatments attempted. Only when the small cardboard box was prepared did she allow herself to feel. She slipped into the staff bathroom, locking the door behind her. The cold tiles pressed against her as she sank to the floor, her hands covering her face. Sobs came, raw and unstoppable, tearing through the walls she'd built to contain her grief. It wasn't just this puppy. It was Lily, the nursery she'd never finished, the life she'd lost, the guilt she carried for not being enough. The tears streamed down her face, her shoulders shaking as she mourned not just the loss of life, but the parts of herself she'd buried to survive. Eventually, the tears slowed, leaving her hollow but strangely clearer. She splashed water on her face, straightened her scrubs, and returned to the exam room. Clara was there, quietly tending to the remaining puppies, her presence a silent support. Faith lifted her head, her eyes meeting Sarah's with a quiet understanding that steadied her. The 3 surviving newborns slept, their breathing steady for now, but Sarah knew the danger wasn't past. Another crisis could come at any moment, and the weight of that reality settled over her. Clara broke the silence, her voice gentle but deliberate. "I lost my sister 10 years ago," she said, her hands pausing over a feeding bottle. "Car accident. I blame myself for not calling her that day, for not checking in. Took me years to learn grief isn't something you fix. It's something you carry." She looked at Sarah, her eyes kind but unflinching. "You're not failing these pups, Sarah. You're giving them a chance no one else would." Sarah nodded, the words sinking in slowly. Clara's story, her quiet strength, made the room feel less lonely, the fight less solitary. She knelt beside Faith, her hand resting on the puppy's head, feeling the soft fur beneath her fingers. "We're not done yet," she whispered, to Faith, to the puppies, to herself. The loss stung, but it also clarified her purpose. She couldn't save everyone, but she could fight for those still here, just as Faith had fought to bring her to them. The morning sun broke through the clouds over Willow Creek, its golden light, filtering into Riverside Veterinary Clinic and casting a warm glow across the exam room. Sarah Mitchell sat cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by the 3 remaining Labrador Retriever puppies, their tiny bodies nestled in soft blankets. The smallest, still fragile but fighting, squirmed weakly as she fed it formula from a bottle, her hands gentle but precise. The other 2, stronger now, slept peacefully, their steady breaths a small victory after days of uncertainty. Faith, the older puppy who had led Sarah to them, lay nearby, her amber eyes watchful but softer, as if sensing the shift in the room's tension. The loss of the 4th puppy lingered like a bruise, but Sarah's resolve had hardened, fueled by a growing bond with Faith and a need to understand the story behind their desperate plight. Clara bustled in with a fresh pot of coffee, her presence a steady comfort. "They're looking better," she observed, setting a mug beside Sarah. "You've worked miracles here." Sarah managed a tired smile, her eyes never leaving the puppy in her hands. "They're fighters, like their sister." She glanced at Faith, who tilted her head at the sound of her voice, her new name already fitting like a well-worn collar. The clinic felt different today, less like a sterile fortress and more like a sanctuary, its walls holding the weight of their shared struggle. but questions gnawed at Sarah. Where was the mother dog? Why had Faith been so determined to find her? The answers felt essential, not just for the puppy's care, but for the closure she craved. Mid-morning, during a brief lull between appointments, Sarah's gaze drifted to the window. The construction site where she'd found the puppies was only a mile away, a place she hadn't returned to since that stormy night. An impulse took hold, one she couldn't ignore. "Clara, can you cover for an hour?" she asked, already reaching for her jacket. "I need to check something." Clara raised an eyebrow but nodded. "Be careful, and take Faith with you, she's earned it." Sarah hesitated, then clipped a leash to Faith's collar, a temporary one from the clinic's supply. Faith stood immediately, her tail giving a single purposeful wag, as if she understood the mission. The drive to the construction site was quiet, the town's streets gleaming from the recent rain. Faith sat upright in the passenger seat, her eyes scanning the road ahead, her presence a steady anchor for Sarah's racing thoughts. The site looked different in daylight, its concrete slabs and rusted beams less menacing but more desolate, a graveyard of abandoned plans. Sarah parked near the chain-link fence, her boots crunching on gravel as she and Faith approached the spot where the puppies had been hidden. The torn tarp and broken boards were still there, now softened by mud and time. Faith sniffed the ground, her movements deliberate, then paused, her ears twitching as she looked toward a narrow path leading beyond the fence. Sarah followed her instinct, squeezing through a gap in the fence with Faith at her side. The path threaded through dense bushes, branches scratching at her arms until it opened into a hidden clearing. There, tucked among trees, was a small encampment, tents in faded colors, blue tarps strung for shelter, and a neat stack of recyclables. Near a burned-out barrel, a man sat on a crate sorting through a bag of cans, his weathered face lifting as he noticed Sarah. He was in his late 50s, with grey-streaked hair and a slight limp as he stood, his clothes worn but clean. "Hello," Sarah called, keeping her distance. "I'm sorry to intrude. I'm looking for information about a dog, a Labrador retriever, a mother who had puppies here." The man's eyes softened, a flicker of recognition crossing his face. "You're the vet from Maple Street," he said, his voice gentle. "I'm Earl. That pup's yours now, ain't she?" He nodded at Faith, who stood close to Sarah, her gaze steady but not threatening. Sarah nodded, surprised. "How did you know?" "Seen her watching your clinic," Earl said, settling back onto his crate. "Brave little thing, trying to get help for her kin." He gestured to another crate, inviting Sarah to sit. "The mother dog, she stayed near this camp. Gentle soul, never bothered nobody, had her pups under that tarp over there." He pointed to a sheltered spot between two trees. "We left her be, gave her space. She was fine until—" His face darkened, his hands clasping tightly. "Until what?" Sarah prompted, her heart sinking. "Poison," Earl said quietly. "Construction. Crew didn't want strays around, said they were a liability. Found her one morning suffering. Couldn't do nothing but watch her go. Died hard." Sarah's breath caught, a hot spark of anger flaring in her chest. She thought of Faith's relentless vigil, her days in the rain, her silent plea, and Faith, the older puppy. Earl smiled faintly at the name. Fitting. She was the strongest, the firstborn. After her mama died, she wouldn't leave those little ones. Dragged cardboard to cover 'em, tried to keep 'em warm, watched. Her follow folks trying to get their attention. Most shooed her off, but she kept at it. Saw her sizing you up at the clinic, like she knew you were the one. Sarah's throat tightened, her hand resting on Faith's head. The puppy leaned into her touch, her warmth a quiet comfort. "She was protecting them," Sarah said softly, the weight of Faith's actions settling over her. "All that time she was trying to save them," Earl nodded, his voice thick. "Some nights I'd hear her whining, curling around those pups in the rain. Wanted to help, but—" He gestured to his leg. "Can't move like I used to. Didn't know how to care for 'em proper." Sarah stood, processing the story. Faith's intelligence, her determination, it was extraordinary, a testament to a love that transcended instinct. She walked to her car and returned with a bag of groceries she'd bought earlier, bread, fruit, canned goods. "Please take these," she said, setting them near Earl. "I'll bring more when I come back." Earl's eyes widened, but he accepted with a nod. "The pups?" he asked. "They make it." "3 did," Sarah said. "Faith, Willow, and Ember. They're getting stronger every day." Relief washed over Earl's face. "Good, that's good." As Sarah and Faith walked back to the car, Earl's voice called after them. "That pup, Faith, she's special. Reminds me of someone who knows what it means to protect no matter the cost." Sarah drove back to the clinic, Faith's steady presence beside her. The truth about the mother dog's fate burned, but it also clarified her purpose. Faith had lost everything, yet she'd fought for her siblings with a courage Sarah envied. It wasn't just instinct, it was love, fierce and unrelenting. Sarah's anger transformed into resolve, a vow to honor Faith's trust by protecting the survivors and ensuring their story wasn't forgotten. The late afternoon sun bathed Riverside Veterinary Clinic in a warm, golden hue, softening the edges of its sterile interior. Sarah Mitchell sat at her desk, surrounded by the gentle hum of the clinic's daily rhythm, Clara's soft humming as she sorted files, the faint squeaks of the 3 Labrador Retriever puppies playing in their makeshift nursery. Faith, Willow, and Ember had grown stronger, their once fragile bodies now robust, their fur sleek and glossy under Sarah's meticulous care. Faith, the older sibling, lay near Sarah's feet, her amber eyes alert but calm, a quiet guardian who had become her shadow. The clinic, once a fortress of control, felt alive with new energy, its walls adorned with colorful thank you cards and photos of the puppy's recovery. Yet a new challenge loomed, threatening the fragile peace Sarah had found, the truth about the puppy's mother, poisoned by callous construction workers, had lit a fire in Sarah, but it also brought scrutiny. Animal Control had received an anonymous complaint, likely from someone connected to the construction site, alleging the clinic was illegally harboring strays. 2 officers arrived mid-morning, their boots loud on the linoleum, their clipboards, and stern expressions an intrusion into the sanctuary Sarah had built. "Dr. Mitchell," the lead officer said, consulting his notes, "we need to discuss the unregistered animals on these premises." Protocols weren't followed. Sarah's heart raced, but her voice was steady. "These puppies were abandoned and near death. I provided emergency care, as required by my veterinary oath. Moving them now would jeopardize their recovery." The officer's eyes narrowed. "You're in violation of multiple regulations. We'll need to seize the animals unless you can produce proper documentation." "Then get a court order," Sarah replied, her tone firm despite the tremor in her hands. "I'll have my lawyer ready." Faith stood, positioning herself between Sarah and the officers, her stance protective but not aggressive, her presence a silent reinforcement of Sarah's resolve. After the officers left, leaving a formal warning, a notice, Clara sprang into action. "I'm calling Martha Klein," she said, dialing the number of a renowned animal rights attorney, "and everyone else I know." The clinic's phone rang non-stop as word spread through Willow Creek's tight-knit community. Clients called with support, sharing stories of Sarah's care, the spaniel she'd saved from a seizure disorder, the parrot she'd nursed back to health. Local rescue groups sent letters vouching for her expertise, and even the mayor's office weighed in, moved by the tale of Faith's heroism and Sarah's dedication. Sarah, meanwhile, focused on the puppies. She sat among them, Willow rolling onto his back for a belly rub, Ember batting at a squeaky toy, Faith watching with a quiet pride. The warning notice lay on the desk, its stark letterhead a reminder of the fight ahead. "They won't take you," she whispered, her voice fierce. "Not after everything." The words echoed her past losses, Lily, her marriage, but this time she wasn't alone. Faith's steady gaze, Clara's unwavering support, and the community's rally gave her strength she hadn't known she had. Days later, the legal battle ended quietly. Martha Klein's expertise, combined with Sarah's impeccable record and the overwhelming community support, made the case untenable. A letter arrived, granting Sarah the right to register the puppies as her personal pets or foster them through an approved rescue. She didn't hesitate. With steady hands, she filled out the forms, officially claiming Faith, Willow, and Ember as her own. As she wrote their names, she realized they were no longer just patients. They were family, bound to her by a journey of survival and trust. The clinic transformed in the aftermath. Sarah hung photos of the puppy's progress on the walls. Faith's first healthy meal, Willow's playful tumble, Ember's triumphant bark. She added potted plants to the windowsills, their green tendrils softening the space, and a small speaker played gentle music during quiet hours. Clients noticed the change, commenting on the warmth, how their pets seemed calmer during visits. Sarah herself was different. Her smiles came easier, her interactions with clients warmer. She listened more, lingered over stories of beloved pets, her empathy deepened by her own healing. One evening, as Sarah and Clara shared dinner on the clinic's back porch, the puppies sprawled at their feet, Sarah felt a peace she hadn't known in years. The setting sun painted the sky in soft pinks, and the air carried the scent of jasmine from a nearby garden. Faith rested her head on Sarah's knee. Willow chewed a stick, and Ember dozed against Clara's chair. "I think I get it now," Sarah said quietly, her hand stroking Faith's fur. "Home isn't just a place. It's where you fight for what matters." Clara nodded, her eyes kind. "You've built something beautiful here, Sarah, for them, for you." Sarah looked at the puppies, at Faith's steady gaze, and felt the truth of Clara's words. The pain of losing Lily would always be there, but it no longer defined her. Faith's trust, Willow's playfulness, Ember's spirit. They had shown her how to love again, how to fight for life, even when it hurt. The clinic, once her shield, was now her haven, a place where healing took root not just for her patients, but for her own heart. As night settled over Willow Creek, Sarah returned to the exam room, the puppies curling up in their kennels. She opened her journal, a habit she'd started during the puppies' critical days, and wrote, "Healing doesn't erase the scars. It makes room for new growth. Faith saw something in me I'd forgotten, a strength to keep going, to love, despite the risk. She saved her siblings, and somehow she saved me too." She closed the journal, her eyes soft as she looked at Faith, who met her gaze with quiet understanding. The clinic was still, the world outside hushed, and in that moment, Sarah knew she was exactly where she was meant to be. The spring sun spilled over Willow Creek, painting the town in vibrant greens and golds, as Riverside Veterinary Clinic hummed with its usual rhythm. The air carried the scent of blooming lilacs from the garden Sarah had planted outside, a small patch of color that welcomed clients as they arrived with their pets. Inside, the clinic was a lively blend of order and warmth, charts neatly stacked, exam rooms pristine, but now softened by potted plants, a cheerful bulletin board of pet photos, and the occasional bark of excitement from the back room. Sarah Mitchell moved through her morning appointments with a quiet confidence, her lab coat slightly wrinkled from a playful tussle with a patient, her hazel eyes bright with a spark that had been absent for so long. In the corner of the exam room, Faith, Willow, and Ember sprawled across a plush dog bed, their golden fur gleaming under the sunlight streaming through the window. At 6 months old, the younger siblings were bundles of energy, Willow wrestling with a chew toy, Ember chasing her own tail in delighted circles. Faith, now a year old and strikingly regal, watched them with the same protective calm she'd shown during their darkest days, though her amber eyes softened when they met Sarah's. The puppies had grown into their strength, their once fragile bodies now robust, their personalities as distinct as their names. Willow's boundless enthusiasm, Ember's fearless curiosity, and Faith's quiet wisdom. Sarah paused between appointments, kneeling to scratch Faith's ears. "You keeping these two in line?" she asked, her voice warm with affection. Faith leaned into her touch, her tail giving a single, deliberate wag, a silent acknowledgement of their shared journey. The clinic walls told their story. Photos of the puppy's recovery pinned alongside thank you notes from clients, a newspaper clipping about Sarah's legal victory to keep them, even a small painting from a local artist depicting a golden puppy leading a woman through the rain. Each piece was a testament to the bond that had transformed Sarah's life, turning her grief into a foundation for hope. As she prepared for her next patient, Sarah's thoughts drifted to the journal she'd kept through the puppy's recovery. Sad sat on her desk, its pages filled with late-night reflections, medical notes, and moments of clarity that had helped her heal. She'd written about Faith's relentless trust, Willow's first playful bark, Ember's stubborn determination to climb onto the exam table. But more than that, she'd written about herself, about rediscovering the woman who could laugh, who could love, who could face loss and still choose to move forward. The journal was her anchor, a record of a journey that had begun with a pair of amber eyes in the rain and led her to a life she hadn't dared imagine. Clara poked her head into the room, her colourful scrubs adorned with cartoon bones today. "Lunchtime, Sarah. I've got sandwiches in the break room. Don't you dare say you're not hungry." Sarah laughed, a sound that came easily now. "Wouldn't dream of it. Be there in 5. Clara's unwavering support had been a lifeline, her quiet wisdom helping Sarah navigate the legal battle and the emotional weight of the puppy's survival. Their friendship had deepened, a partnership built on shared triumphs and unspoken understanding. As Sarah joined Clara for lunch, the puppies trailed behind, Faith leading the way with her steady gait, Willow and Ember tumbling over each other in a playful scramble. They settled on the clinic's back porch, where Sarah had added a small table and chairs, a space for moments like this. The view overlooked the town, rooftops glowing in the sun, the distant hum of Main Street, the construction site now cleared for a community park, thanks to Earl's advocacy and Sarah's quiet funding. She'd kept in touch with Earl, bringing him supplies and ensuring he had access to the town's new outreach programs, a small way to honor his role in Faith's story. Sarah took a bite of her sandwich, her gaze settling on the puppies. Willow had stolen Ember's toy, sparking a mock chase that ended with both sprawled in the grass, panting happily. Faith sat beside Sarah, her head resting on her knee, her eyes scanning the horizon as if keeping watch over the world. "You changed everything," Sarah said softly, her hand stroking Faith's fur. "You saw something in me I couldn't see myself." The words echoed her journal's final entry, written late the previous night. "Faith taught me that trust is a choice, even when the world feels broken. She led me to her siblings, to this life, to a version of myself I thought was gone. Willow's joy, Ember's fire, Faith's strength, they've shown me that healing isn't about forgetting. It's about carrying the pain and still choosing to love, to fight, to hope. We saved each other, and I'll spend every day making sure they know it." The clinic door chimed, signaling a new arrival, and Sarah stood, brushing crumbs from her scrubs. She glanced at the puppies, at Clara's warm smile, at the life she'd built from the ashes of her grief. The pain of losing Lily would always be there, a quiet ache in her heart, but it no longer held her captive. Faith, Willow and Ember had shown her the way forward, their trust a light that guided her through the darkness. As she returned to the exam room, ready to care for the next patient, she felt a profound certainty. She was home, not just in the clinic, but in herself, surrounded by love that had grown from a single, brave puppy's plea. The day unfolded with its usual mix of challenges and joys: a kitten with a fever, a retriever needing stitches, a client sharing stories of their pet's antics. Through it all, Sarah moved with purpose, her heart open in a way it hadn't been before. The puppies played in the background, their presence a reminder of the miracle that had unfolded here. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, Sarah locked the clinic door, Faith at her side, Willow and Ember tumbling behind. She looked out at Willow Creek, its streets alive with the promise of new beginnings, and knew she was exactly where she was meant to be.